Okay, here we are. So, awesome. Yeah, let's take a look at the whips. I'll just go up to the start, see whoever posted first after we had the high res. We saw most of these, although I know some people had power outages. We couldn't really see it right away. I'm sure everybody's had some chance at some point, but we can go and just kind of scroll through the ones that already have been posted just to see the high res. There's some good renders here. And then yeah, we'll probably get to the newest posts. So these all look great, really beautiful cannons. Okay, and here we are with John, and that's yeah, we've got the LOD 0. Looks like it's well, that just looks like the high res mostly.
This is the one from Sunday.
Today, okay, cool. That's right. Yeah.
No, Sunday. This is from Sunday.
This is Sunday.
The
there's more posted more later on, so we'll skip past this. It looks great, you know, where it's at, but yeah, if it shows up later, we'll skip past this. Cat's very excited right now. Malene, are you there? You've got this post here, and looks like. Oops, let's go back to it. Okay, so yeah, this looks like the high res. It's looking pretty lovely. Everything
this is actually a low res. I made high res. I added handles and I worked on high res.
Okay. So, is the did you post the high res? Is there earlier post of the high res?
Let me just post it right away. Sorry.
Okay, cool. No problem. I just want to see the high res as well, so we can see like what kind of detail we're gonna get from it. This is no normal map bake, right? This just looks like the model. Cool.
Yes, no normal map.
Yeah, okay. Well, the LOD 0 looks really good and looks really clean, so that looks good so far. I guess when since I don't, or the way that the whip is set up, when you post to it, we'll come across it again. We'll talk about it then. But the main thing I want to make sure at this time for everybody that I talk to and anybody that needs any help or anything, I want to make sure right now we're just going to go through and make sure you understand the concept of creating the normal and the UVs for that. And the one thing that I do think is really important to talk about just before we go through everybody's individually is what exactly we're doing here. And that is to create a low resolution model that would essentially go into a video game and would be optimized for animation and explosions and you know, whatever you need a game to do. But we have to create a low res because the high res model is just too high resolution to go into video games most often. And so we have to create a low res that fits the kind of the space, the same exact, it should fit almost exactly where the high res is, and it just kind of sits right on top of it. So what the reason for that is we bake that normal map down. We bake all the high res information into a normal map. And in this project, what is most important for us to all understand is that the Canon LOD 0, that is the lowest level of detail, the one that's going to go into a video game, the one that all the normals are baked onto, has one material applied to it. And that means also that the UVs should all fit into 0 to 1 space. That is very important for this exercise. For video games, you really need to know how to utilize UVs, optimize them, make sure that they're all tightly packed. You don't always need to make everything unique. There's plenty of things that will be mirrored, such as this. This will just be mirrored on one axis. And then we don't actually have to bake both sides, but anything that's optimized is going to be beneficial in a video game. And it's also easier because if it's all on one texture, a 2048 is going to look better if there's less giant pieces rather than more giant pieces. Some things you want unique, the reason being you don't want seams. The seam is down here on this Canon cylinder, down on the bottom, and we want to make sure that we are ignoring or hiding, not necessarily ignoring, but hiding the seams as best possible, and then also making sure that anywhere that we want it to be unique, where we want it to not be mirrored. Like the top of this Canon would look really weird if it was mirrored, because you would see kind of a butterfly pattern going all the way up and down, and it'd be really hard to get it so you couldn't tell it was mirrored. So this is a certain place in which you don't want mirrored geometry, is when you're staring at something in the face like this, and quite literally with characters, you don't want to mirror their faces, because usually you need that center part of their face to be a little unique and not like a mirrored texture. Whereas these wheels totally can be mirrored. This piece, since it's a little like low profile as far as right here, we could probably get away with mirroring it. And then a lot of other things will just be duplicated. Like, you know, if you have a bunch of wheels, you can just make one wheel and then duplicate it a bunch of times. You don't have to make unique UVs on every wheel. So this exercise is all about creating an optimized, clean model that we can then bring into a video game. And this is how we do it in the industry, so that we are not wasting any texture space or polygons. But the most important thing is that it fits exactly over the high res, and it looks like this Canon just got scooted a little bit somehow. It just there might be some minor issue that got scooted around when I did this for class on Sunday, but it's very important that that it basically fills the same volume. It should almost be exactly the same volume as the high res. And so anything that feels like it's out of volume, like this back area feels like it might have gone out of volume a little bit, probably going to be an issue, and I should probably just kind of adjust it a little bit. But remember, this is all, this Canon LOD is what we're going to be working on. We're going to bring this into Substance Painter, and it's all one UV. That is really important. So once we get it onto one UV, one material, we'll bring it into Substance Painter and add the materials there. Okay, I just wanted to get that out of the way so everybody knew what was kind of expected, and then let's talk about each person's project. So, Malene, this looks great so far. I think it just probably needs UVs and then to do a test bake. I think the only thing that I'm a little confused on with this one is that the back end looks like it's kind of hovering in space. Usually they're either a little lower to the ground or leaning, and I could see that being maybe a rotation value. We can do that after we bake. That's not something you need to do now, but it is something to keep in mind.
I was confused. I thought maybe I will rotate all the parts after.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. I wouldn't say that you're wrong in thinking that way. What I want to point out is that even if it is rotated, I don't see how it would intersect with the ground in a way that it wouldn't bump up this corner. If you look at a lot of the Canons, they have this kind of angled thing, and one of the things, and I'm just wondering about the design of the Canon might need kind of at least an angle brace or some sort of metallic bottom. Maybe it's one of those all metal Canons, and those don't really need, you don't need to worry about it quite as much, but that's the only thing I maybe a little would think about, is just what does the end of that Canon actually end up feeling like. But otherwise it looks great, and when you get it in with the normals, I'm sure it'll look fantastic.
Thank you. If you scroll down, I have a newer version with.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. Sure. See, on the whip, is it on the whip, or is it? Did you reply?
Yeah, it's on the whip.
Okay.
Yeah. A little bit down.
Down further. I'm not. Oh, there's new messages. There we go. It's just not showing up. It says new, but it's not. There's nothing there.
The one before
I think
Jack.
it's right above Jack.
Right above.
Yes.
Here we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, and this is perfect. The UVs look great. All really clean.
No, these are not.
That's
mine.
not yours. That's a different one. Okay, cool. Okay, here we go. This is the high res. That's what you're posting. Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, so in this high-res model, there's one thing that I would give feedback on, and it's kind of how sharp these edges are. I don't know, maybe there's reference for Canon that does have really sharp edges. Sometimes that can be, I might be wrong here. But I'm looking at this, and if it was wood or bronze, we'd probably have a thicker ridge around it. And then also the sharpness of these squared off edges feels a little maybe computer generated or stiff. Most of the time in real life, things are like rubbed down a little bit. They're a little softer, more beveled on these edges. And so that might help with what I was talking about when the Canon chassis actually rotates down and that corner hits the ground, you're probably not going to see it stay this sharpness forever after a few times of the Canon going off. It's probably going to get banged into almost a beveled shape. So when you're doing high res, it is very important to bevel things on kind of a level that at least it has in reality. In video games, sometimes, especially stylized ones, they will bevel things even more than reality. But the bevel, what that does is it makes it feel like it's not made of boxes or like really crisp, like glass boxes. If it's bronze, there's a chance there's just a little more bevel here, and that would be the feedback I'd have on it. It's kind of the same thing I was talking about with the low res, but otherwise, it's a beautiful model, and everything looks like it's working pretty good. But yeah, it's also the same with the Canon itself. There's just a lot of sharp edges, and so if you want something to feel high resolution, giving the bevels a little softness really helps. Cool. Okay, thank you, Malene. It does look really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing it when it's all baked.
Thank you.
Okay. And then, yeah, here we are with Sky. It looks like you have already done a bake for your Canon here.
Yeah, I did a little bit of sculpting in a high res and baked it in Substance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it looks, the model itself, the low res looks fantastic. Yeah, it looks very clean. There might be a couple areas that we don't need quite as many polys, but most of the polys look like they're there for a reason. The axle definitely.
I definitely may have gone a little overkill on one or two places because you got me real good in texturing last semester when I left facets. So I wanted to make sure I didn't do that.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you look at this area here, geometrically, you could think about it a little simpler as just rings instead of it gets into this bolt in the center. It's nice to have the detail if you got the polygons. You can add all kinds of displacement, and the normals always look amazing when you have a lot of polygons. But there's a pretty big chance that that's just kind of a waste of polygons in a video game. If everything was kind of a little more on the Canon quad level of polygons for the axle, we'd be all right. But that'd be the only thing I'd say about the cleanliness. And then let's talk about the UVs, because what I'm seeing is happens a lot when you break each wheel apart, you break each round thing apart. Eventually, you're just kind of left with these giant circles that are wasting a lot of space. And
I can definitely stack like half of my sheet there.
Exactly. So I would mirror the wheels, mirror at least some of the wood pieces of the chassis, and then think about these big holes as still being useful space. You can take a lot of this stuff and shove it into these holes. And the more you do that, the more you kind of cram things together, you can scale the UVs up and your textures will be a higher resolution. Because that's the one thing I'm worried about here is it doesn't feel like we're really getting the resolution size that we could get. I don't know if, let's look at the high res. I know you posted that.
I haven't posted an updated version. You have it in the Maya file I submitted, but I didn't submit a screenshot because it kind of obliterates my toaster.
Yeah, totally. Got it. Okay, so this is the same one, just without the bolts and stuff.
Yeah, I dented up some spots and whatnot.
And that looks cool. I love this. I think that's going to add a lot to the texture and substance painter, as well as I'm happy that the struts are thicker and the cannon feels great. It feels good. I just would love to see a little more resolution. This thin one here, I'm not sure exactly what it's connected to, but it is causing.
It might be the inside.
Okay, so that would be a perfect thing because it's the inside of the wheel. Just make it a little smaller and put it inside of the wheel. Those kind of stacking of relationships is going to clear so much space. And then, I mean, I could just see that even without even stacking it in these holes or doing any mirroring, there's a lot of free space that we could do here. I guess when it comes to UVs, professionally, people think of it like solving a puzzle, and people are proud of how much they can pack their UVs together without wasting a lot of space. I see a lot of space wasted here, and if it was me and I had a bunch of little things and maybe some of those little things weren't getting enough resolution, I would just scale them up and put them here. Even if the texel density is different, it might as well use that space. You just don't want drastic differences in texel densities. You want to keep everything pretty close, but also you don't really want to waste space if you got the opportunity. Because if you do it right, this cannon could look really high resolution and still be on like an iPhone game, and it still looks great. But if you if we don't pack the UVs very well, you will find that 2048 you're still going to get really blurry textures, and 4096 is usually just a little too big for kind of a prop like this. So we want to get it packed so that it looks good when we bake it at 2048. Otherwise, we're kind of missing the quality bar. But LOD0 looks really good, other than kind of the hubcap, and then the bake looks great. I think that bake is going to end up really good in Substance Painter. I think I would spend a little bit of time rejiggering around the UVs so you could get it a little high resolution, because although the normal map looks fine, I know when you put wood gray and bronze in there, the resolution is going to be a little too low. So good job overall. I do want to see one more pass on the UVs.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sky. Okay, John, we're actually on yours now. Very cool. Okay, so this is baked. It looks like you've modeled out some of these bolts, which is fantastic. I think that's one of those things that if you are in a really high fidelity game, we will see the bolts modeled out, and it does add so much to the silhouette. Okay, most stuff looking pretty good here. I prefer.
I definitely want to optimize the UV map. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a mess right now. At least it's mirrored, so there's that.
Okay.
But
yeah. I mean, I can tell when it's not, like there's a lot of stuff that's mirrored. There's a lot of things that could be optimized. But the one thing I do like to see in these is the cannon itself needs to be rather high in resolution. Otherwise, your main object that everybody's going to look at is going to have low resolution in it. So I usually will make the cannon just a little bigger than everything else. But yeah, it does look like it needs a revision. The other thing I'll point out when it comes to cylindrical is definitely cut the caps off. It's going to make your life a lot easier.
Okay.
One of the main reasons it makes it easier is you can get a cylindrical map without an issue. So, like, I'm going to duplicate this and I'll just show you real quick what I'm talking about. Because if you grab the caps, you're always going to have an issue with this cap. But if you don't have the caps turned on, or if you don't grab the cap there, and you do a cylindrical map, it ends up like this. Very, very clean and straight.
Nice and
when it's clean and straight, the pixels are going to work better, and they're just going to look clean on the normal, even if you don't really have that high resolution. So that is very important, cutting the caps off of the cylinders. And, I like that it went around the edge. Sometimes that's useful. But if it starts to curve like this, it will cause problems. So I would recommend cutting the caps off, straightening it out, making the cannon a little bigger.
Okay.
But the normal maps look like they're working great. Cool. And it's a beautiful model. I love this model. I love how crunchy it is. It's got the snow tires, you know.
Yeah, it's a French cannon from the 1500s or something.
Oh, cool. Nice. Lovely. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, John. Yeah, you can see the normal map bake. Awesome.
Yeah, there's the low and high poly too in that image set.
Yeah. Okay, so these pieces here, these extra bolt or the clamps, the metal
There's
clamps.
Strips of leather.
There's strips of leather. Okay. So this is a situation, and I know I go back and forth on this, but this is a situation where I think it's better to be all in one shell. I think you can get away with it here, but the reason why I would say that is if you notice when you keep these strips of leather really low resolution, we don't have enough polys to round the normal here, and it gets kind of dark. And that darkness I was noticing in the normal map itself. If you see a drastic change of color over a large flat area, that's usually a sign that the normal maps are working too hard and it's kind of an artifact. This is something I would even paint out in the normal map if it kept on coming out like that. But ideally, if you look at like the way that I did this wheel, the bolts are stitched in because it kind of because I have enough geometry. Trying to add another layer of geometry makes it a little. There's too many 90-degree turns, and the normal maps just have to work a little too hard. So this is one area in which I usually would suggest making the wheel one shell, but the bolts separate. The struts being separate, the bolts being separate, but the full shell of the wheel would probably be a cheaper geometry if it was just one shell. But otherwise, looks fantastic. Really impressed with the modeling on this one. Yeah, French cannon, awesome. Cool, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Mitchell, we've got some funky issues with the baking. You think it's your UVs? Okay. The LOD0 looks quite fantastic. Everything seems to be pretty nicely laid out. The only thing I would point out is just to keep away from N-gons, any kind of faces with more than 4 sides.
Yep.
Just a minor thing. Yeah. And then here's your UVs. Okay, so definitely cut the caps off of that. Looks like a cap there. That's going to help UV this one a little better. Because even if you like cut the cap off and you just unfold it, it won't fight with it. Anytime you're going over a cylinder 90 degree, it's gonna have some issues. But let's see. I'm not exactly sure what the problems you were saying with the bake are. Like you didn't post the funky issue.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's mainly just the black spottiness. I've ran into it a couple times outside of the class whenever I'm baking high res onto a low res, and it like bakes shadows. It's especially prevalent with the ambient occlusion turned on.
Okay.
So I'm thinking that's just a problem with the UVs, but I could be wrong.
There's another place in which that is an issue is the frontal ray and rear ray. When you're baking, and I'm going to go over all this stuff in heavy detail when I'm talking about substance, but since you brought it up, that is an issue. I can show you real quickly that if you are, let's see, just bring up some random model to show you that when you bake the high res, you have to think about the frontal rays and rear rays being either big enough or small enough. And what that is, this is when you go to bake mesh maps, there's the bake maxil frontal distance, bakes, and the max rear distance.
Okay.
And what that actually is it shoots a ray out from your model, and it ends up looking like this, where it shoots it out from the normal and it expands it, and then it goes back down and kind of grabs anything that is in the high res area.
Okay.
And so if you have some bolts or you have some corners that are like maybe not, it's not necessarily that they're in the same volume, because they can be in the same volume. It's just when the rays shoot out, it just kind of misses it. You can make the max frontal ray bigger, and it'll basically, so what's happening often is you bake it out and it goes like that, and then it goes in, and then it goes back to normal, and it doesn't catch certain elements. So if you make the max ray bigger, it'll catch more elements, and that's great until you get to the point where you're accidentally catching the other side of the model.
Yeah.
So that also could be what the issue is, in which it's catching the bottom of the model or the inside shadow area. And if you look at this one, you can tell that I actually moved my Canon away from the chassis. Even the high res is moved a little bit away from the chassis so that I don't get the occlusion too heavy on the inside here.
Okay. Would you recommend doing that for mine? Because it seems like they're all pretty packed together.
Yeah, I would do that, and I would also just double check your max ray and rear ray if that isn't working. So yeah, definitely move this up a little bit. What you have to do whenever you're moving a model, you have to make sure that you are grabbing your low res and your high res and moving them at the same time, because if you just grab your low res and move it, it's off of the high res, and you're not going to get these normals baked to that object. Yeah, I would suggest just moving it up a little bit, see if that works. That's probably going to solve most of your problems. If you have any other corners or weird little issues, you might want to use the max frontal ray and max rear distance. Just start playing with those, moving them up and down to see if they work.
Okay.
But that's, yeah, I'll get into that pretty heavily later.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cool. Well, the model looks good. Ultimately, UVs look pretty good, but definitely cut those caps off of the any cylinder. And then something I suggest for Substance Painter is that all of your objects should kind of mostly be facing in the same direction, especially if all of your wooden UVs are facing in the same direction. Then you don't have
for the grain.
Move your wood grain this way and that way.
Yeah.
Piece.
I got you.
So if you do have objects going different directions, it can kind of make your life a little more complicated. Whereas if everything in the UV is set up nice and clean, going the right direction, you hit it with a wood grain, everything looks great.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. All right, Emma, this looks awesome. Looks like a yeah, nicely complicated, like this multiple struts here. That's very interesting. The Canon looks very nicely laid out. I like how clean this UV is here. Everything looks pretty good in the modeling. I think the one thing that we need to do what this doesn't have is we really need to hit it with the mesh display soften edge. Because I see a lot of facets, and that just tells me that the soften edge step hasn't happened yet. Are you there, Emma?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Just making sure you're hearing this. But yeah, the model looks great. If you hit it with the mesh display soften edge, then what will happen is sometimes some of your edges, some of your corners will get a little dark. That's okay, just fix them. I promise you this will look way better in the long run than having the facets. So if you have these facets, what happens is the normal map doesn't really fix it. No matter what texture you apply to there's always going to be those hard edges, and so I highly recommend doing a mesh display soften edge. And if you like, oftentimes if you take a ring and you do a soften edge, you will see some artifacts that you do have to fix. So let's see, I'm just gonna make a pipe to explain this. So this is a normal pipe. Most wheels are gonna look like this. We're gonna do mesh display soften edge. Okay, I think soften edge. There we go. I must have hit something else. Mesh display soften edge, and then what happens is it starts to look pretty ugly. That sucks. Yeah, obviously it doesn't sound like good advice from Elijah if I'm telling you to do this and it ends up here. But the reason why we want to do this is because it'll bake the normals around these corners and everything, and it won't have a sharp edge. So I add a little extra edge to these edges and then just one extra edge anywhere where it's getting dark. And then when you do a mesh, and you have to redo it, when you do the mesh display, soften edge, now those kind of dark edges are reduced, and it looks a lot better. It's a few more polygons than you would need, but here's another reason why we do this, is mesh display soften edge is not just for visual content. When you have mesh display harden edge and everything is hardened like this, everything is faceted, in a video game, it thinks of each one of these pieces as having its own normal geometry versus all of them being kind of combined. So it ends up being twice as expensive. So if you have facets in your geometry like this, and it's because the mesh display harden edge or the soften edge hasn't been turned on, the model will actually be more expensive than if you add these extra rings and do a mesh display soften edge.
Okay,
it's just
that makes sense.
it's a kind of one of the typical standard things about modeling for video games. It's the way that it like collects all the data. It thinks of it all as one unit instead of each one being a separate unit. Each polygon is a separate unit. It's going to add a lot of information. So that's the other reason, not only visually but memory-wise, why we do it that way. Beautiful cannon, looks fantastic. UVs look really good. I'm not seeing any other issues there. I just say soften the edges and then look at the normals, make sure they look okay, and then bake it, and I think it'll go great. Cool,
Okay, yeah,
thanks,
that
Emma.
helps a lot.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Christopher Shell, hey, look at this thing. Looks like it's already took it into ZBrush and baked it down. That looks really fantastic. I love that filigree. Cool. Yeah, this is looking really good. I could say, you know, the only thing that I like to see when it's like a wooden thing is some beveled edges here and there. And since you already kind of got it so far into ZBrush, sometimes it's nice if they're not too crisp. They only like end up being that crisp if they're coming straight out of the workshop. If they've been in any kind of war, they've definitely been beat up a little bit. We'll be able to get that in the texture, but it's also nice to have just a little bit in the model itself. But frankly, the optimization is pretty impressive. I knew it wasn't, you know, super high poly, but I didn't realize it was quite that low poly. That is some work there. Awesome. Yeah, the UVs look good. I just want to make sure the cannon is given its proper amount of UVs. It looks like people are breaking up the cannon into several pieces, and that's totally okay as long as the seams are in the ridges that they should exist in. The other thing I'll state, though, is that if they are separated, you will have some issues if you have a big swatch of bronze or a big maybe like a grime layer that goes over everything and kind of smudges everything. If you do break it up, sometimes it can be a little tricky to get it to match
use triplanar
exactly.
for that.
Yeah, and triplanar will do it, and brushing by hand will do it. I mean, these days we don't worry too much about it because Substance Painter allows you to paint directly on the model. But that is a reason for keeping something all together. If it's something like a spaceship or like a magic wand, one of the reasons why the effects artists always want you to keep it as a single shell object is because they usually use those UVs to put effects over it. And if the effects are like a streaming beam of magic, and it goes and then it like blips and goes somewhere else, you know, it's just like, that's one reason why it's helpful. I'd say for this one, you're good to go. I don't really need, I think it's going to look great. Triplanar is going to work and everything. I just say it's good habit to, you have a large thing, get it as big on the UV as possible and have it all as one shell. Not only is that good if for effects or you know, like UVs, seams, all that stuff, but it also, like I was talking about with the normal maps, UVs are a way to optimize models as well. The more different shells of the UV that you have broken out, the more polys you end up with in the memory storage of a video game. So the more single shells, it's kind of saves some memory, optimizes the polygon storage.
And for ZBrush, are there like student licenses available, from DigiPen currently? Because at the moment I do not have a ZBrush license.
Yeah.
So all this was just done in Substance Painter.
Sure. Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Yeah, these are just masking in Substance Painter.
Yep. And the sculpting tools in Maya are pretty bad.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, this makes sense. This looks like a Substance Designer. I mean, you could just use a black and white, and that's great. And I will show how to do this in class. That's a great idea. I should make sure to talk about
I just painted it once, mirrored it, and then used that as a anchor point and copied that over a few other spots, just using a fill layer.
Okay, yeah, totally. So, to answer your question, I don't know what the situation is on ZBrush. Is Maya something that everybody has access to as a license?
Maya is free, has a free version. It's
a free version.
It's only ZBrush that costs $500 for the student version.
I think from January 11th, we have to contact DigiPen VPN to be able to have a ZBrush at home.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've already used up my free trial last semester.
Yeah, totally, I get it. Okay, so it sounds like we have to VPN. I'm going to look into that, and then basically we won't have anything due in ZBrush for a couple of weeks anyway, but I want to look into this, and I want to make sure that everybody's got access to ZBrush because it's incredibly useful for hard surface. And I think there's something like a limited amount of licenses or whatever, but still, I want to be able to teach ZBrush in this class, and I'm going to see if I can do whatever I can to make sure that is possible.
Right.
Anyway, I love what you did with the bump map so far. Looks like it's everything's going to work out great when you get those textures in there.
Cool.
So yeah, great work, Christopher. Do you have any other questions?
I was running into some weird baking issues when it came to the baking by mesh name, but then when I baked normally without mesh by mesh name, where it's just everything, it got rid of those artifacts. It was only on like the very front and the very back where I've got some of those wooden planks.
Yeah.
Everywhere else was fine.
Okay, and what Christopher is talking about is in Substance Painter, you can name your high res and name your low res, and if you name them with the first prefix being the same, it will look for your low res, the low res name will look for your high res name, and it will match up objects, so you don't have to do things like what I was doing, where I'm separating out the cannon away from the chassis. It is something that is cool, and I would say it's useful if you can get it to work right, but I have heard of this kind of thing where, because it's a complicated technical step, it comes with its own complicated technical issues. And I can't really tell you how to fix it without your issue, but it is something that it's something that I want to make sure that we do have a good understanding of, because at some point it's easier to bake things by naming them rather than spreading them all out around the world.
I'm looking back at my high res and it looks like I just missed one. So that one middle plank where I guess it's not visible on there, but that one of the middle planks that was still separated. So that's the one that was having the bake issues because it didn't have a low res to bake to, and the one that was the low res had all those planks for like the floor combined. So I just got to combine those two, and it should work fine.
Yeah, hopefully that's it. 9 times out of 10, when it comes with the naming system, there's just some typo that happened. So that's usually what the problem is.
I was just confused because it looked a lot like it was an overlapping UV when it wasn't an overlapping UV.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, cool. It's, I still would think about, I know this is very, very optimized, and I appreciate you for doing that, Chris. Like, this is clearly you're not messing around when it comes to keeping the polygons low. But I do often want to put one more edge on these kind of box edges and soften that rather than bake it as a sharp edge, because the bevel will make it feel more real. It will, and this will look great as a as PS3 or 2 video game. But as far as today's video game high-end stuff, you usually want to put bevels over hard edges if you want this world to feel like a real world. And then it's just most stuff is these days is going to be that heavy with geometry. And then the best part about that is when you're ready to make the LOD1, the one that is so this would be LOD0. You're staring at it up close. You get to about here, it switches to a lower resolution LOD1, and at that point, that's when these would disappear. And we're not going to do that in this class. We're not going to make LODs. It's an incredibly boring process. But just to keep in mind that when you get to here, those things will disappear, but you won't really notice it because the form will be the same. And so from this distance, everything will look the same. And then you get even further, that's LOD3. You get to here, and it's just like a bunch of triangles. But usually it reduces by half each time, and there's totally ways to do that. But I just suggest to get into a good habit of making high-end, basically perfect bakes. Make sure that there is no, hard edge or no dark edge. And then if you need that to be optimized, well, you can just remove some of those extra edge spans that you maybe were just luxurious or they're not necessarily as important to the model.
Yeah, like if it's on the bottom side of the face, then that probably doesn't need to be beveled because it's never going to be seen from that angle.
Yeah, totally, exactly that. Okay, cool. So yeah, most of this is just fantastic, and I do appreciate how low and optimized you kept it. I'd say if anything, I would add a little more, but I'm impressed. So yeah, good work. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so yeah, we talked about this one already a little bit, Malene, and we went over that, and it looks great. And then Jack, let's look at this. This looks like it's in Substance Painter, and it looks fantastic. All of these bolts are looks like it has a crisp, decent amount of geometry, or sorry, normal map resolution, and yeah, it looks overall pretty good. Do you have any issues or questions, Jack? Oh, weird issue on one side. That looks like the opposite side looks kind of inverted or something.
Yeah, I think I just did the UVs. Like I didn't stack them perfectly on top of each other or something.
Oh yeah, and then when that happens, it wants to bake both of them. And the best way to stack them is to not stack them, but just duplicate the object, and then it will have exactly the same UVs.
Yeah, I did duplicate them, but then like when I looked in the UV editor, they were slightly off, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah. Oh well, since you don't have to remodel anything, it's just a duplication and an inversion. But the model looks great. I'm really impressed. The complexity is awesome. I love looking at an in-game object like this where I can't see any polys and I'm not seeing any kind of weird polygonal hard edge. It just overall, besides that one artifact, I think things are going really well. Cool. Thanks, Jack. And then Connor.
Hello.
Hey. Okay, cool. This is looking really clean. Looks overall pretty decent. Yeah, I'm not seeing any issues at all. It looks like really high fidelity, lots of crispness. I talked a little bit about how I do like it when there's a little bevel on the wood. Wood just doesn't tend to have hard edges. Like, I think the only time you really see super hard edges is like glass cubes or sometimes steel cubes will do it. But wood always is a little soft on the edges, and it just usually requires a little more geometry. But then, oh yeah, I guess you do have a little bevel. It's just high fidelity. Okay, cool. And then the one thing I'll point out is the cap on the gun. I know it's great to not put a seam there, but if you notice, the whole thing starts to really curve like this, and it just ends up not being the cleanest way to handle a cylinder such as a cannon. You're probably not going to see any actual issues. Substance Painter is good that everything about the Canon already is like clean enough that it's not gonna really have any issues. I just find if you are making something when you're really trying to optimize the texture size, and your normal map's baked down, if it's curved like this, you at a lower resolution, something that's above 20 or below 2048, you're probably going to start seeing the pixels on a ridge like this. And that's the reason why it's a good idea to keep the Canon to be mostly 100% flat as far as the individual ridges and spans. And so that's really just, if you have the opportunity in a cylinder to unmap it as a cylindrical map, you will get the best results versus if the unfold does any kind of curving or anything like this. There are chances for the results not to be as quality. The other thing I'll say is it looks like your seam is on one side. And perhaps that isn't the side that we render on, and that's fine. But usually the seams work best if they're just on the bottom, because that's going to be the part that you see the least. And even if you're running by and you look at it from the left, you look at it from the right, you won't see the seam because the bottom is the part that's the hardest to get to. And then I'd say for things like this, long strips, they're going to be better if they're flat. It's actually easier to stack them if they're all flat, but also just keep in mind that if you have a pixel and it's diagonal, you're going to probably get more of the obvious rasterization or the pixeliness if it's diagonal versus if it's flat. It usually ends up being pretty clean. So in the process of keeping my UVs as clean and optimize in a way that's going to work best with the texture, I try to keep any long strips that will have pixels going back and forth on them as flat and as clean as possible. And whenever you hit the unfold, it always kind of moves it around a little bit, which is one of the main reasons why I really like to use the constraints in the unfolds. If you can use a U or a V constraint, like if I'm using the V constraint here, you notice everything starts to go up and down. There's more of a curve. If I'm using the U constraint, it shouldn't do that, and it should just kind of put it into the place that makes sense. Whoops. Yeah, so I could accidentally move it around left and right, but if I hit the button, unfold along U, it keeps it all in this flat plane. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll do a cylindrical map, and then I'll select the whole thing minus these caps. And then I'll do a unfold along U, and it doesn't go up and down, but it does kind of spread it out however is needed to make sure the pixels feel right. So that's one way to keep things kind of flat, but mainly just like when you might have used an automatic, or you might have used a layout tool that like moved it around like this to give it diagonal. That one's going to be pretty easy to grab and just rotate it until it's flat. If it looks flat, it's going to be better than if it looks diagonal. It just ends up being a little better. But other than that, fantastic fidelity, really clean normals anyway. All the stuff that I just was talking about, I don't think you're going to actually see an issue. These are just kind of best practices and what's expected in the industry.
Okay. So like for the Canon itself, since it is unfolded on one side and it's not causing an issue now, I should just leave it alone? Aside
you can leave it alone. As long as when you get it in a Substance Painter, it doesn't look like garbage. I'm not going to call it out next week. I'm just going to want to see a good looking Canon. I just want to say that for best practices, it's usually good to cut the caps off. If you could put it in a Substance Painter, it looks good. Let's just move on.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Connor. Nietzsche Prawn. Awesome. And this is beautiful. Cool. Yeah, it looks really nice, low-res, optimized cannon with just the right amount of polys from this distance. Yeah, overall it looks pretty good. I could definitely see the UVs being optimized in some way a little more. Maybe the chassis doesn't have to be unique on both sides. We have a lot of these little circles. I'm not sure what everything is. But the thing that I'm worried about here is that I'm not seeing a large mass that would be the cannon. And that I guess that's what I would be worried about, is making sure that the cannon had enough resolution in the normal map.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's the only thing I'm worried about, as far as maybe a little more optimization there. Other than that, I think the model looks fantastic. The the layout and the spread looks pretty decent. But yeah, beautiful model. Thank you, Nutripon.
Thank you.
All right, and then Liz. Oh wow, that's interesting. Oh yeah, I seem to remember that. There's those cannons with those weird bars on the top. Okay, cool. So this is the low res, and then here it is without the bars. So I really like the bars. I don't know what the reference is from, but I seem to remember that they were kind of welded in. And if they were welded in, I would suggest making that all one shell so that we don't have that kind of sharp seam in between. But if they're not, if they're an actual separate piece, if they're not welded, we can make those separate pieces. That's fine. Overall, this looks pretty good. I would love to see, no, actually, I think it's just the lighting. Yeah, I think this is pretty solid. It's pretty simple, but overall, it works for exactly what we need. And let's take a look at the UVs. Cool. This is a great cannon layout. Large, big cannon. We have the big wheels. Things look pretty good here. And then there is one little spot that has a seam issue. It was probably when you were doing the cylindrical map. That happens when you do a cylindrical map and there's just a slight off in rotation. Usually you just don't want a seam that has a like an L shape in it. It does cause issues. So let's say if I was to grab this. So what we do, we put a planar map, a cylindrical map in. Just rotate it. Degrees. Yeah, what happens is we'll rotate it around, and if the UV editor is up, I think you can usually see the seam as you're rotating it around. And you want to get the seam on the bottom kind of straight, but every now and then, for some reason or another, it does this, where it kind of pops off to one side. But we can fix that. There's an easy way to fix it, and it would be to select these edges and cut them. Just this edge loop here. So if we cut this and then we stitch it, and we use the stitch together, it moves it and stitches it. When you use that, it'll move it over and kind of stitch it in. And it's one of the nice things about the cylindrical map system is that it's pretty easy to fix if you just do that. It doesn't take too long to just cut and then grab the other edge and say stitch together. It'll just put it right on that side. You just don't want to grab any edges that you're not stitching. And it just, yeah, it stitches it right in. So that'll fix a seam like that. I'm not terribly concerned about that little edge. I think we're good to go. I just want to point out how to fix it if it ever shows up in an area that is awkward and you need to fix it. Cool, Liz, it looks good.
Thank you.
All right, and then Young. That is really beautiful.
Hello.
Little. Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
It's a beautiful little cannon. Is this? Wow, this looks rendered. Yeah, nice.
That one is rendered.
Okay, this is the high-res rendered, yeah.
No, that's the low res.
It's got the normal map? Awesome.
That's
cool.
The low res.
It looks beautiful. Very, very nice.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, big, beautiful. It looks awesome. Let's see. Okay, most things are working pretty well here. I see some things are, folded to this, or a little bit diagonal. That does cause some issues.
Yeah.
I tend to like it a little more upright. I think we're going to be okay on this one. But where it's really going to cause issues is you have to get your wood grain to align in that direction. So you're going to have to adjust. If you end up keeping it that way, you have to adjust your wood grain so that it's all at that angle.
The reference it was looking like a wood, but it was painted thickly, so it looked like this paint finish look to it. So I couldn't see any of the wood grains. So probably would add scratch marks on the paint. That's what I was planning. So I got the whole resolution of the body big on the UV.
Yeah. That sounds like that'll work. Everything will be fine. I just want you to be aware that it will cause issues because it's not only wood grain, but all of the substance painter systems are kind of designed for up to right or flat or up and down. It's just because mathematically simpler, works that way.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful model. I think the render looks so good. I'm pretty good on it. I'd love to see just a little bit of bevel around the edge here, but frankly, it's not really causing a visual issue at the moment. I'm just a little worried about how big these polygons are without any kind of support poly, whereas the wheels have it, and that looks pretty decent on the wheels. The other thing I would say is these caps on the Canon. I'm not sure where you're setting the scene, but this cylindrical map will be a lot easier if you cut these caps off.
Oh, okay.
It just flattens it out a little simpler.
Yeah, that's a little problem I'm having with the baking the map. They're both duplicated and the UV's on top of each other, but the one of the side is having problem.
Huh. Do they look the same without the normal map on there?
Yeah, they're exactly the same. I tried to fix it by moving the left one and duplicate on the right.
Yeah.
But it had the same issue.
That's odd. Yeah, I mean, really, you should be able to just select this object, delete this one,
yeah,
select this object, duplicate it, and move it over. I don't see how that would cause any issues.
Yeah, that's why I was so frustrated trying to figure it out. It shouldn't cause any issue, but keep baking it. Maybe the settings I did on the baking was wrong, but
I just, if this one works, you should be able to duplicate it as many times as you want. I'd say that one looks like there's some sort of normal issue with it. Yeah. But I can't say for sure. But in every experience I've ever had, if something works, then it works, and you just duplicate that.
Yeah.
So that I maybe try that again. I do see some minor stuff popping through here. Not sure what that's about. But it's only when we look really, really close do we see that.
Yeah.
That looks like it's grabbing another edge somewhere or something, but minor things that always show up when we're baking normal maps. It's just kind of the way it goes. You got to dig into it, figure out what the technical issue is, or paint it out by hand.
Yeah. Do you recommend that we completely separate some objects before we bake them?
Yeah. I mean, I would recommend, like this Canon, I separated because it was getting so dark when I baked it close to the chassis, and it was also only getting dark on one side, so I didn't really want it to be like that. So yeah, I separated them, and that made it a lot better. It's just when we get all our textures in, I'm gonna duplicate this, and then I will make sure that this is the final, and we'll put that into the place that it needs to be, and all that jazz and stuff. I guess it's just making sure that you have you keep in your scene a baking file, the file that's used for baking. Because this, if I start to move this cannon around and I don't move the high res, it's going to cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, if you separate the cannon from the thing, I think some things will be a little better. Also, that is probably happening because of how close the axle is to the cannon there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it looks pretty good overall, though. Young, I'm looking.
You can call me Jason.
Jason, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing this one all textured up. It's gonna be great.
All right.
Okay. Is there anybody else? I'm scrolling down to the bottom. That looks like the bottom. I don't know if I missed anybody. All right, cat, slow down. This is the time of the night when the cat just runs around the house crazy. And right now she's behind the desk, which she loves to hide behind my monitor and grab my hand whenever I'm moving the mouse. So if I swear, it's because I'm being attacked.
Oh, she's so precious.
She's wonderful. Okay, cool. So I think we're going to move on to the next step, which is to bake this. I'm gonna show everybody me baking this in Substance Painter again, and then we're going to add materials in Substance Painter. And I'm just gonna run through, for anybody who hasn't used Substance Painter, I'm gonna run through all the basics, and we'll texture it, and then we're going to bring it into Maya and render it as best we can. One thing I will do here is I am going to mirror some of these things because Substance Painter does know if things are mirrored, and it will only bake the first side, which works out pretty well. Yeah, gonna grab these two, combine them together, and stitch down the center. Mesh merge. And then I can, one final thing that I like to do is mesh display soften edge. Okay, and so this is ready. I, might as well, I don't have an axle. I never really made the axle part, and I'm just gonna throw something in real quick since it's not very visible. There was just a couple of things I left out, but I don't recommend it. I think it's very important to not only add all the details that are required for a model, but if you add more details, everybody is always impressed. And that's what you want. You want people to be impressed with your models, not bored by them. Okay, and then I'll duplicate this one as well. This way I could just have something that is it's full, the full system, and then I can look at it all together. It always looks weird when you're just looking at one half. It's hard to take it seriously. Since I've got that axle in there, I didn't UV it. I just need to throw some UVs on there that match everything else. These boxes, if you don't want to spend a lot of time UVing a box like this, it's really easy to just do an automatic UV map. That's the UV automatic. And what that does is just projects it from each angle, each direction. And it broke it up into these 4 different pieces. I want it all as one piece, and so I can very quickly stitch all these together. Come on, cat. She does this constantly. It's her game. Sometimes it hurts. She's got sharp claws. All right. So if you stitch these together, just using the stitch together button, very quickly they just become one unit. If they're one shell, it becomes a lot easier. So, I've already done UVs. Come on. I always feel like it's a horror movie because she's always hiding and really
just ready to come out and get you.
Yep. I can find somewhere to put this axle. It's so much smaller. Hey, no. Okay, and that's about it. That's all I want to do, and then I will just double check my high res, make sure that something. A bit off here. Actually, the high res and the low res, and I need them to be 100% on top of each other. You can use the star at the end of the cylinder. If you snap to that, I find that that's a good way to snap. But again, I don't know if there might be some other problems that I have to. At one point, move something, and then I scooted everything around to that. So about there. And I could, re-UV this. This is usually a good idea to re-UV when you do something like this. I'm just going to re-UV the Canon. I think that's the only part that I'm doing any kind of stretching and manipulation. I'm kind of convinced this cat is an alien. She's always trying to communicate with my phone. She's like, give it to me. I need to speak to my people.
The cat's in low Earth orbit.
Is that Futurama episode where
Nibbler.
And all the cats want to take over the world because they want to harness the electricity?
Oh, that one, yeah.
Okay, so high res all looks good here. I'm a little worried that since I don't have another wheel here, it's going to get confused. I'm just going to make sure that the high res has another wheel. And now I can export both of them, and I want to export both because I probably moved some stuff around. It's just always a good idea to re-export. You never know. So yeah, I'm going to export the low res and the high res of the Canon, and then we're going to take them into Substance Painter. All right, export the low res. And then we'll load up Substance Painter. And this, for some people, might be the first time you're using this program. So I'm going to go over some stuff, all the basics of it. Just double make sure I'm recording. Slayer of dust bunnies and fingers, yes. Yeah, she loves going after the mouse. That is very true. Okay, so this is Substance Painter. The basics: you've got these two viewports. They'll make a lot more sense if we import an LOD0, and we do that by going to File, and we're going to just create a new file. And when we do that, we're going to find our low-res model, Canon Low. So yeah, Canon Low goes into the file here for the new project. I'm going to make sure that my document resolution is 2048. If I have other maps that I'm using, we can import those. But I do not, so we're just going to import this. So the first thing I'm going to double check is just make sure none of the normals are inverted. Maya doesn't always show if normals are inverted, if the values are negative, so I just go around and look to see if also, all the normals look soft. That's also what I want. Yeah, so overall looks pretty good. And then, yeah, let's talk about all this stuff. So if you go over here to your texture set list, this is top right usually in the default UI. The texture set list is essentially your material. And if you notice, there's just one here. If you see multiple things here, multiple things with eyes under your texture set list, that means you have multiple materials attached to, say, I have a different material to, this one than to basically, if you have another material, it's going to think of it as another material. That happened, but let me just double check these, make sure I have the right one. Another thing I absolutely do when I check UVs is just make sure that I'm not going over the edge. And this one's so damn close, it's actually a problem. So it's not really going over the edge. It's so close that it would be a problem if this was a slightly lower resolution texture. And that happens. That's something that happens in LOD level of detail. And not only do your models reduce in geometry in a video game, but your textures also reduce in resolution. Every time you go 50% away from the model, it shows a 50% smaller texture. This is called MIP mapping, and it does that so that you don't get a super high resolution texture rendering at a very far distance. What happens if you did that is it would be very noisy. You wouldn't be able to tell which pixel to render, and so the pixels kind of just get really noisy. So we have this thing called MIP mapping, which makes the texture's resolution go down the further you are away from the model. And in that case, the lower resolution won't look as good as your Substance Painter model, and you'll have bleeding from, say, if it was the wood up here, it would bleed to the cannon down here. And so since I needed to fix that, I am going to redo this scene. So yeah, we'll do a new scene. I'm going to grab my cannon low again and make sure that we're at 2048. We're just bringing it in again. And hopefully, I'm going to just discard. And hopefully, if we look at it now, we don't have the cannon going to the edge. I just need to do a little bit of speed. One of those things where it doesn't seem like a problem until you're halfway through a video game and you get a bug saying that from a certain distance, a bright red spot appears on your character's face. And that's because your UVs are too close to another UV. Oh yeah, MIP mapping. Thank you, Christopher. That's awesome. Yeah, Christopher just posted in the main chat the difference between two MIP mapping images, and one is all noisy and confusing and moire pattern, and the other one kind of softens out as if it's blurry towards the far away. And that's what you want. You want things to be as slightly blurry as they go far away. Because that's okay. So this model, there's only one shader on there. I made sure of that when I was exporting from Maya. We only are using one shader. And then that's the texture set list. So if you bring in a model that has multiple materials, you can cycle through the different materials in this texture set list, and the layer system will change. The texture settings and the base colors will change based on whichever one you click here. So that's what the texture set settings is about. These are the materials, and each one will produce a different set of maps. We've got the properties here. The properties is basically whatever you're currently working with. So if I just am using a brush, I've got the properties of a brush. If I'm using a material, they will show the properties of a material. So the properties are going to be whatever you are currently working with. Basically, I don't usually use the texture set too much unless I have multi-materials. Properties I'm using all the time. And then here, layers. Most people probably have used Photoshop. I'm assuming by now you have used Photoshop and you understand how layers work. They work pretty close to Photoshop in Substance Painter. They're a little different in that you can't just make a layer and paint on it. I mean, it kind of works. I guess it works these days, but in the past, you usually had to make it a fill layer or a paint layer, which is adding an extra attribute to this layer, and it gives you more control. So I generally recommend not just adding a layer and painting on it. You usually need in order to get it to work properly. But so that's layers. We'll get into heavy. This is where all the material work actually happens. And if you notice, if you just use any old material, it usually comes in, well, not that one, but any smart material or any complicated material will come in with a bunch of layers doing different things. So if I just threw a bronze over everything, you can look into this folder and there's all kinds of different things going on in that layer. And we'll get to all that, what all those things are. But before we get there, I need to bake my normal maps. Something most people have done so far. And we do that in the texture set settings window. So we go down to where the channels are. We just want to make sure we have the channels we want. Height is not a channel that we're actually going to use, but it does end up affecting our normal maps, so we keep it in there because for wood and some other things, the height map is going to be a channel that we want. In our pipeline, it's just when we plug it into Maya, it's not going to be there. But then roughness value is it's a very simple thing, which is is the surface rough or is it not rough? If it's not rough, it's going to be very, very shiny. I just added a fill layer to everything, and if we go to roughness here, the fill layer gives us the opportunity to add blank colors, or you could add a texture if you wanted. But down here where it's roughness, I can turn my roughness values up and down. And I'm going to turn my base color down a little bit so you can see the shine a little better. But if you notice, roughness value up high, we're really rough, there's very little shine. The kind of mid-range, you start to see it shiny, but not like glass. This is more like a brush steel. And then as we get closer and closer to zero roughness, it becomes essentially like glass or chrome. And that is, if you think about the molecular structure of the surface of the object, we're talking about a super smooth surface, whereas the roughness of a brushed metal or something that's like an older weathered object is going to have a lot more rough molecular surface. And that's what's going on most of the time when we're talking about shines. The other thing we might talk about is metallic, and this is a really fun one. Metallic and roughness are totally separate in how they work. Roughness value just makes it shiny or less shiny. Metallic will take your diffuse, your color map, and it's going to reduce the color map when you turn on metallic, and it's going to add that to the shine. And when it, hi John. When it adds the metallic, when it adds your color to the shine, it actually makes your color map, your base color, almost black. And this is how a lot of metal works. If it's kind of a brass, it's going to look like this. Your shines will be yellow. Yeah, it's a Monopoly piece now, exactly. So if you have a brass Monopoly piece, it's going to look like this. It's going to be shiny, yellow, all that stuff. But if you had a plastic Monopoly piece, it would look like this, where the shine is white. And that is the main difference between metallic objects and metal and plastic objects, is the shine. The shine is actually white here on a plastic object, but if we turned it metallic, the shine turns yellow. And you can think about that like brass, or if we go more towards the red hue, copper is the same thing. So metallic, what it does is it basically takes the color away from the base color kind of diffuse and adds it to the shine so that you get that shimmer, that sheen that is so important when you're thinking about metal. So I'm going to just delete this layer. It was just to talk about metallic and roughness. And then we're going to go back to my texture set settings, make sure that I have my base color, my roughness, my metallic, and my normal, and then I want to bake my mesh maps. The other thing I talked about in the makeup class that I haven't really got into too much with everybody is the colors here. Let's see. If we look at the colors that I applied, it only works if you have maybe a 3 colors. I think after a certain amount of colors it stops working. But basically the colors here are going to be my different. So there's bronze, steel, and wood, and I made those different colors in Maya because in Maya you can color and it will show up in the material ID map in Substance Painter, and I'll show you that when we bake it. But first, I'm just noticing high res in the bleeding of the ridge of the metal here, so I'm going to center the pivot on these guys. Let's just modify center pivot, centers it up just a little bit. We're going to see later. The other thing I was having problems with during class, which it looks about fixed up now, is where those bolts are in comparison to the low res, and right now that looks pretty good. Sort of minorly off with the placement. Have that, and instead of moving the low res, since I've already got the low res here, I'm just going to try to move the high res in the right space. I know it's always nice when things just work great straight out of the box, but it just tends to be the case when it comes to normal map bakes. There's always something you got to watch out for. And we're just gonna out for these things. See that it was a little off in its placement. I know I made it correctly, but somehow it got scooted around. That, and then make sure I'm directly on top of itself.
That's what I had to do with my bolts.
I just got to scoot them around. Get a little scooch. Everything will be nice to make all these mathematical. It's nice to make them 100% clean, but every now and then, we're clumsy.
Yeah, some of them are just a little bit off, and they won't bake.
Okay, that should do it though. So I'll duplicate this. There's always something. I think that's what's just good to remember is that there's always a mistake. It's not the end of the world. Just fix it. Okay. So I haven't even baked any mesh maps. So let's go back down to texture set settings, and we'll go bake mesh maps. Bring up this window. The first thing I'm going to do is change the output size to 2048 so it matches my document. Then I'm going to create my Canon or a high mesh. I'm going to not create, but bring it into the high definition meshes. This is also an area which, let's see, I think there's a way that you can set up the naming convention so it matches, although it is a little tricky, but where is it? Mesh by name. Or match always. I'm going to leave it on always because I didn't actually name all these, but if you name them correctly with the right suffix, like it would be Canon _ low, and then the high poly would be Canon _ high, and you turn this to by mesh name, it should actually bake each one of those objects on its own so you don't have any overlapping occlusion or normal mapping cutting into your edges or any artifacts, basically. It does a pretty good job. I'm not going to worry about it because this Canon's simple enough, and I like some of the occlusion anyway. So we'll do that. I'm going to click through the different options just to talk about them for a second. We've got the common, we're already there. I want to point out that if you are baking your model and you are missing certain elements, like bolts seem to go black, or you're not catching the UVs or the normal map from your bolts, or from anything that has any kind of raised lump that you just want to project to a flat plane and you're not catching it. Sometimes it's because your max frontal distance is too low, so you can crank that up just a little bit. And if there's other situations where you're accidentally grabbing the wheel on the chassis, there's a reflection of the wheel on the chassis, that could be because your max frontal distance is too big, so you want to bring that down a little bit. So those are important. We've already been over the mesh naming, and that's about everything for common. Normal, nothing to talk about there. World space normal, we use that for the generators, and we'll see that in a minute. ID, this one I do want to talk about because the material ID is something that will be different if you're getting your material ID from Maya versus ZBrush. Maya, we have materials, and it's a single color in this material, and we could say that's the material attribute. It's this one color. It's not a texture or anything. It's just one color, and that's what is going to bake. If we wanted to use ZBrush and we wanted to use vertex painted objects in ZBrush, you can paint the model directly. You paint the vertices directly in ZBrush. It's very useful. You would switch it from material color to vertex color. And this is also if you painted your model in ZBrush. Say faces are really easy to paint in ZBrush. You could grab your color source as vertex color, and even though it's set to be ID map, it will grab your vertex colors from ZBrush, put them off in a texture, bake them off just like a normal map. It bakes it off into a texture, and then you can use that later. Since we're doing the Maya method, we're going to use material color, and it's going to grab our material colors from Maya. The limitation I've seen is that it doesn't like using more than 3, but they may fix that. Ambient occlusion, I've never really touched that, but it's very useful. It's going to look great. Curvature, and this is for generators. And if you don't have a curvature map, your generators won't do a hell of a lot. There's a lot more that happens if you have a curvature map. What a curvature is all about is if you have an up and down in your normal map. Well, it's not always, the computer isn't always aware of that up and down. The curvature map will kind of understand your normal map a little better, and it makes it so it knows whether things are like a cavity or a crease. It knows that would have a little bit more dirt or occlusion in there because of the curvature map is good at understanding that stuff. Position and thickness, I'm not really sure how useful they are, but I just leave them on and we go from there. Cool. Anybody have any questions on any of those things? Cool. I'm just going to hit bake, and if you have any questions, you can still ask, because this is going to take a while. Okay, that looks pretty good. Just some minor things that I was having problems with before were the, well, it's still just kind of bleeding to the edges. Just wondering if there's any and then a little more, so then more ridge that is actually more realistic anyway. Well, let's work that out again. I promise the rest of the class won't be moving bolts around. All right, we'll bake mesh maps again. Cool. Looks like it scooted it down a little bit, and it looks a lot better. Okay, cool. So yeah, this looks like it worked.
I have one question.
Sure.
So you have one Lambert on low poly model,
right,
yeah. And 3 different Lamberts on high poly.
That's right.
And Substance still understands that you have 3 layers because of you had 3 colors on the high resolution one.
Yeah, so here I can show you right now what Substance doesn't really know what the 3 things are for yet, but what it did is it baked this material ID map, and if we look at this one, let's see, can I think I have to go to textures to find it. So this is texture set settings we baked there. The final window that I haven't talked about is the shelf. This is where just about everything happens, where you get your textures, your brushes, your smart materials and everything. So if we go down to the shelf, we can click on textures. It's going to show us the specific textures for our project. And here it's got the color map, and that is the material ID map that it's already plugged in into that channel, the material ID channel. And here I could export it out, and I could just like save it to anywhere. But what that would be helpful with is if I wanted to clean it up. So class can. Okay, I'll bring this into Photoshop just to show you it. So this is what it exported. So these are the 3 different materials, and it exported them out. It bled the edges. It does that because of mint mapping, like I was talking about before. If they are bleeding, then it makes it a little easier to make it creating artifacts. But this is the material ID map. And how this is useful is if I'm in Substance and I have decided to add a material like bronze, and let's just get started with that. I'm going to add a smart material. We'll do bronze corroded. That's a fun one. And I'm going to just pop that in here. It's going to go over everything. And I don't want it to go over everything. I just want it to go over the cannon. So I'm going to right-click on it and say Add Mask with Color Selection. And that's going to go to your color map, and it's going to find your mask ID, and we're going to use that. So what happens is nothing really shows up, but if you notice in Properties, it gives you the this option down here that says Pick Color. And then I will grab, pick color. It shows me my material ID map on the model when I do that. And then I want to pick the orange for bronze. And then it will basically make a mask that is just the orange. It does give you also some tolerance options. In this case, it's not really a big deal, but a tolerance, either you can kind of play with the tolerance if you're having problems with edge bleeding or something. But what that does is it picks your mask for you. And if we look at this layer, this is a folder. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in it, but it's got a color selection mask. And that is what's telling us where the bronze should be and where it shouldn't be. This is very, very, very useful for understanding how to separate out your materials. So we have bronze as one material, and then I can find another one for wood. Let's see, wood walnut, is that a good one? So we can pop on a wood walnut. This goes over everything. Maybe walnut isn't the best one. It's kind of grainy. wood chip. Yeah, wood chip has a wonderful grain to it. And so, yeah, I want to use this one. I don't want the whole thing to be wood. So I'm going to right-click on it and say Add Mask with Color Selection. And then I can go to my Properties and say Pick Color and just pick the red. And now the wood is only on the red. This way, even though our texture set is one material, we have 3 different materials applied to this object. Okay. So, does that answer the question?
Cool, thank you. Yes.
Okay, so let's focus. Let's not get too far with the wood yet. I want to focus on the bronze for a second. Talk about some cool things that we're seeing. First off is how some of the edges are worn off, and that's lovely. That's because of the curvature map gives us that ability. The curvature map will make it so that it can tell what things are high and what things are low. The normal map itself looks pretty good. I'm not seeing any major artifacts in the normal map itself, so we're good to go there. And then the only thing is, bronze is okay, but it's, I don't know, it's a little crunchy. There's definitely some seam issues. One way we can fix that seam issue is changing find out where maybe the seam could be. Looks like it's on dirt drips. If you find your seam, it's often in the, where is it? It's often in the generator itself. Oh, it's under properties. Properties wasn't visible. So if you have properties window open, and then you find your generator, which most of these objects have, most of these smart materials have a generator applied to them. This generator has all kinds of cool options, like how much it's spreading and how intense it is. I want a little more shine, so shine is good. But I want to get rid of that seam, and I should be able to get rid of it by changing my UV channel here. So let's see. Or maybe not. Maybe this one doesn't give me the option. But you should be able to change your UV projection. And then I'm seeing it on this generator. So some generators, if they don't give me what I'm looking for, I will just delete them from the object. But I swear, usually you can find a UV projection. What you have is you have your layer, you have your fill layer, and then a generator mask. So you kind of have to understand what you're looking at here. In this case, this is the initial one. It looks like it's probably doesn't really change if I change the UVs here, so that's not really going to help me. If I select the fill layer, I don't know if it's giving me any UV projection here. So yeah, it doesn't seem to give me any options. And then if I go to my generator, generators are usually where you see the UV projection. So I'm not seeing that there. I'm going to delete the dirt drips because I want a shinier cannon anyway. But if we go back to the oxidization, we can still see a UV seam there. I'm going to see if I can fix the UVs on that one. Yeah. So this one looks like that was pretty simple. You just got to select the actual layer because there's a fill applied to it, which is this bronze stuff. And if you change the projection in properties from UV projection to triplanar projection, it actually ignores any UV seams. Makes it almost as if it's like a three-dimensional real-world texture. And that's very, very helpful. Okay, so that fixes the seam issue, and then the kind of the amount of grime on here is a little much. So let me go back to my generator here. I guess this would be the mask. Got global balance. I can kind of play around with that a little bit. Looks like the global blur, I want to keep that down. These some various textures, I can turn them on and off. It's not, like, it's okay. The curvature is really going to show you the most what's going on here. Really what I'm looking for is I want a little more shine to the cannon so it's just not fully corroded. And that's looking a little better. The other thing I'll say is that the color itself is just maybe a little too turquoise. So I want to find that color. And you can usually find it by clicking. Once you find where the color is showing up in a mask layer, you want to click it on and off until you find a very, the specific thing that is giving it color, whether it's the fill. In this case, it might be. I swear I saw some colors that were showing up, and I just got to figure out where the colors are actually showing up that I can affect. It should be here somewhere. I swear I saw something that was like showed the actual colors. So let me just dig around a little more. Missing that. Yeah, there should be a way to change the colors, and it's always going to be in the properties. You just got to figure out what options we've got to look into. Looks like that isn't even giving me my. Yeah, it looks like the initial generators are concrete, so they don't even have color. But this one isn't really my favorite bronze to begin with. So I wonder if that's just funny because I swear I saw the color balance up here somewhere, but it is either. Yeah, it's not showing up here. Just a lot of options to play with. It's always fun, but yeah, it's like when you want to get it to do a specific thing, it can be annoying to find that one specific thing. I feel like there is something.
I think you just found it.
Is it here?
No. When you selected that color, see the gradient underneath that, the effect. Right underneath the square.
Oh, this one here?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, so there's the mask, and then and that's something that's very good to explain is that you have your fill layer and then you have a mask layer, and you can have generators for both of those. So in this case, the fill layer has a generator, and then the mask has its own generator. So the fill layer, if we click on the gradient generator here, this is where our colors. Thank you. Yeah, and what I wanted to do is they're just a little too bright green. I wanted a little more of that kind of real typical corroded green. And then this has just, it's pretty funky. It's a little crunchy, but definitely has the little more of that darker green, which I wanted. So intense corrosion, I think I want to play around with this so our corrosion isn't quite so intense. I just want a little less contrast, but also a little less of it altogether. Like that. The thing that I'm still seeing is I don't like how it's kind of uniform over the whole thing. Usually when you have corrosion, it's going to be very specific in certain spots, and then it'll kind of disappear from side to side.
It's like it's not using enough of the curvature where the rings meet up with the base of the cannon. There should be a bunch in the cracks.
Yeah, it's a little bit happening, but it's I don't know. I think I want to just test out if I can use the other the bronze statue. I think that one's a little higher level, just a little softer, and so the bronze statue probably going to want over the bronze corroded. The bronze statue just looks a little more believable. Okay, pretty much the same thing though. Just less of some issues. We'll bring down that green to not be quite so bright, and then I can find my generator here. And yeah, like I want it to use the curvature a little more, but then still be visible. Well, what I'm trying to get away from is where everything's just crunchy everywhere. I think it's very important to have some areas that are smooth, some areas that are not totally crunchy, because if you want something to feel shiny, if it's crunchy, that gets rid of all the roughness values. So I want something like this, but at the same time, that is it's still. I need a little more something else. Like I need some dirt in there. So let's say we've got our dust. I'm going to bring that from the old bronze and see if we can get that to show up. Okay, this is just dust. It's a little too crunchy, so I want to bring it beneath the corrosion. And then maybe we can just bring down the overall intensity down a little bit so that it's not quite as so now the problem is we're just like way too shiny and corroded all at once. It's getting ugly. This is not necessarily the prettiest so far. So first off, let's delete my old material, and then I forgot to do the color correction here. Sorry, add mask with color selection, and I'll pick the color of the bronze. So now we're just focused on this, and then what I want to do is just kind of play around with these until they feel a little more believable. We'll keep some shine in there. This one, I need to change this from UV projection, because you see that seam there. I'm going to change it to triplanar projection, and I'll do the same with the dust. Didn't seem to fix it here, but why? It looked better before. I think it looked fine when it was just all crunchy everywhere. Yeah, the biggest confusion I find with the layers is that you've got your main layer, the fill layer, and then you've got the mask of that fill layer, and each one of those can have a generator, and that gets a little confusing. The one thing I'm feeling like is I like this when it's crunchy, and I can't seem to get the balance to look right when it's less crunchy, so I'm going to keep this. But I'm going to add this all to a new group, and I can add a mask to that. So I'm going to group that thing and add a white mask. And now I should be able to use a brush. And if I'm using a brush with properties being set to white, and I'm in my white mask folder, it's not going to do anything. Well, it shouldn't do. If it's black, it's going to do this, where it deletes it. And that's probably what I want. Probably use black. Okay, so in the brush, I'm on a mask. It's going to change the options depending on what thing I am painting on. So if I'm painting on a mask, it's going to be grayscale. And if it's black, it means it's getting rid of the mask, or it's turning away that layer. If it's white, it's adding to that layer. So I can go back and forth between white and black. And what I'm going to do is use a fun brush, like something with a little more texture to it, and just kind of get rid of some of the shine in areas, or some of the corrosion in areas that I feel like aren't really doing it a whole lot of favors. So you can shrink your brush with the cap. It's actually called, it's the brackets, that's what it is. So you can change the brush size with the brackets, and then when you have a brush, you can, I'm going to brush black onto here, just kind of lightly give it some little more variation in shine. Let's see, let's change my flow or my opacity down to be a little lighter, and that way it affects it a little softer. I also want to make sure that I'm affecting the height map. That's something that does often cause a lot of issues. If you leave your height map on, it will get really, really crunchy everywhere. Turn the height map off. It generally doesn't add a lot to the corrosion of the Canon. Patina and corrosion barely even lift up past the surface of a model, so I tend to keep my height map mostly flat when it comes to the corrosion here. If you ever find yourself like this, where the colors show up, or you're looking at your normal map instead of your or your any of these, just hit M. It'll bring you back to your fully rendered view, and then if you hit F, it'll also bring your Canon into the view. You can see the whole thing framed. All right, I'm just gonna do a little bit of touch up on the top here. I'm trying to use a fun brush to, you know, give it a little more than just a gradient or something. I just need to kind of give it a feel that it's been used by real people. And so what I want to do is give it some texture. I don't want it to look airbrushed, but I also want some shine to it. So that's why I'm bringing in a little bit more shine to the whole Canon. Generally, when you have these two different types of materials on top of each other, like corroded and bronze, you want to keep it kind of crunchy, kind of sharp in between the differences. And the reason is it looks a little airbrushed if you try to make it too soft. And so that's why all of these brushes tend to be kind of crunchy. Yeah, underwater a really long time. That, you know, a lot of games use props that have been underwater a long time. It's just kind of the treasures and stuff. There's a lot of games that go for that. But yeah, now just trying to make it a little shinier. I want that shine because that's going to be pretty. Everybody loves when things are shiny, and I just want it to look believable, and I want to pay attention to everything. A lot of times in Substance Painter, people will just kind of rush through, throw some materials on, and move on. And that's totally fine as long as it looks believable. But if you are a stickler for high quality materials, you're going to want to just make sure that we are playing around with certain elements that give it something that's beyond like the programmatically created textures. So, and doing a little bit of stuff by hand, I find is really important. Yeah, lots of corrosion there. I'll come back later for a grime layer. Any area that's like grabbed a lot by people generally is going to be a little shinier. And then all in all, this the bronze shine still has, to me, a little awkward color to it. So if we turn off the corrosion, we look at the initial bronze, it's a little too like peach color. I want it a little more gold. So I'll select the bronze base. We'll go to properties, and you can usually find, if it's a fill layer, the base, the channels, and in the channels you've got the options to change that color. So I'm going to go a little more gold rather than so red, a little more color, and then when I add that corrosion, it's it's a little too brass, so maybe we little more red there. It was feeling very peach color, and this to me feels a little more believable as a cannon. Okay, I'll do a grind layer, but I'm going to do that over all of the objects, and then so now we should move on and start talking about the wood. And I did have a good one here. I think it was wood ship, one of these wood ships. Let's just throw each one of these on and see what it gives us. This one is okay, but if you look real close, it's very noisy. It's something I'm not particularly fond of, so we'll get rid of that one. We'll do wood ship. Let's see if that one works. This one's fun, but it does, if you look closely, it is noisy too. Some of these, if you just kind of make it tile a little more, will look better. I do love this kind of gunk. That gunk is working out pretty well. I don't want it over everything, but there's also the way that it's lighter at the edges. That is also very nice. But also, again, just kind of noisy. I think I really do like this wood ship one because even though, you know, maybe it isn't 100% realistic, it just really feels like a real crunchy world wood rather than okay, so now I put that wood in. I'm going to have to mask out so that we're only putting the wood where we need it. So I'll right-click, add mask with color selection, and then I'm going to pick the color, and that's red for the wood. And that looks pretty good. I'd say the wheel, though, there's some issue with some seam that's minor, but the other thing is that generally nobody would ever make a wheel with the grain facing out like this because it would fall apart in 2 seconds. Usually when you're making a wagon wheel, you make a long strip of wood that you bend into a wagon wheel shape. So if this wheel is wood, it's either going to be, each one of these kind of chunks is going to have the grain go along with the wood. And if you notice the way that I made the UV on this, it should be horizontal. And if it is horizontal, that wood grain will match the way that I was talking about. Yeah, you bend it with moisture and heat. It's a steaming procedure. You have a steam box. You steam the wood, you bend it a little, you steam it some more, you bend it a little, and that's how wood is created on that shape. So what I'm seeing is the wood is in the wrong for the wheel, but it is in the right direction for the chassis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the chassis the way it is, but I'm going to change the wheel. And even though the color selection, mask with color selection is good to go, I am going to add a white mask and use a brush to with a black on that mask to get rid of the wood on the wheel here. So I don't want to get rid of it on the struts. The struts look perfect. In fact, if you look, each one has a different grain, or some of them have slightly different grains, and the grain is going along the direction of the strut. And that's going to give you the most strength in real world, and that's why I would want it built this way in CG, is so that it looked believable. But here's a cool thing we can do. Instead of using a brush to get rid of the mask, like I was about to, I'm going to use a polygon system, and it's this thing over here. This is just like a brush, except it fills polygons or entire elements rather than using a brush. So you could, poly by poly, if you change your color and your properties of the polygon fill, poly by poly, you could change it to being a black mask, or I could switch over to element, which is going to grab the entire mesh, everything that's stitched to that mesh. Very, very quick way of creating a mask in Substance polygon fill mode. So you can either go triangle, polygon, or the whole combined object, everything that's stitched to that object. And that worked out really well here. And then what I'll do is I'll do another wood, and we're going to change the grain on that wood. So we have one wood going the right way and another wood going a different way. If I was really smart, I would have known exactly which direction all these woods were going in the UVs, and we would have had it all figured out there. Okay, applied a new wood. This wood is going to look the same because I haven't done any changes, but I am going to add mask with color selection. I'm going to select the wood, so it's only in the wood, and then I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to add a black mask. And so now you can't see that new layer I added at all, but I'm going to use my polygon fill on my mask layer, and I'm going to make that white, and I'm going to fill the wheel. So now the wheel is filled, although, oh, I see, because with its color selection, let's see, I want to add mask with color selection. What I forgot to do was, I'm going to group it into another group, and that way it can have multiple masks on it. So let's see, let's go back to where I was here. So this one, I need to select my my whole layer. This is just the wooden layer, and I'm going to group it. So it's in a new group, and we'll call this one wood chassis. And then I'm going to add a white mask, and using the polygon fill and element object thing, I'm going to select the wheel, and now we don't have wood on that mask, on that layer. Now I'm going to add a new one. It goes above everything. This is in a new layer altogether. We'll do the same thing, add mask with color selection, so we're only picking the wood, so I'm not picking the bolts and stuff. And then I'm also going to grab this whole layer, group it, that's Control G, groups it into a new layer. We'll call this one wheel. And then now I can add a new mask to this. I'm going to add a black mask. So you can't see it at all. And then I'm going to use the polygon fill, and in this case I'm going to turn the polygon fill to white and select that wheel. And yeah, now it's just grabbing that wheel. It looks like everything's the same because those I didn't really do anything different between this material and this this material. Let's see, I think I've got this material. Oh, it looks like I've got two of these. Yeah. So I've got this material and I have this material. Two different materials, even though they look the same. So now, let's just save this for now. So now I'm going to grab my wheel material, and I'm going to change the rotation of the wood grain. When we do that, we open it up. We'll open up the wood material, and I'm going to look for my wood grain. It looks like there's white stripes. I think those are streaks. There is some roughness stains. There's pattern to it. Yeah, pattern looks like what I'm looking for. So there's pattern, and then I think there's another one called wood fibers. Both of these need to be rotated. So I'm going to turn off wood fibers. I'll get back to that. But if I go to pattern, then I'm looking for what is creating that pattern. It looks like it's this mask in which looks to have some sort of generator or fill. Actually, it looks like a fill. And then in the fill, I can go into material properties, and I can change well, I guess it wouldn't be here, but see, there should be a place to change the rotation. Yeah, it looks like it's not in the fill, but in the pattern of the mask. Okay, that looks like it's just for a brush. Is a way to do this. So you can try just switching it over to a trilinear, but when that happens, it's still going to project it away. But I should be able. Oh, UV transformations. Just a little tab that I didn't hit. There's always something you miss. This little caret, if you that little tab, if you bring it down, it's going to show you your UV projection, either your scales or your rotation. And in this case, I want to rotate my value of this wood grain to be basically 90 degrees of what it is. It's already at 90 degrees, so let's set it to 0. And It looks like it's doing it if I just have to maybe set it to 180 to see it. Now you can see the wood is curving with the wheel. That's exactly what I want. And then maybe it's a little large of a grain, so let's scale up the UVs to better fit the wheel grain. That would be something like that. Oh, lost it. Notice it kind of only pops in and out depending on what scale it's at. That looks about right. The wood grain's going in the correct direction on the wheel, and it's still going in the correct direction on the chassis. Looks like it's right there as well. So that looks good for the main part of the pattern. The other thing was the wood fibers. I do want to rotate those as well. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look for what is causing those fibers. If I rotate these, does it do anything? No. If I select my mask and go to my generator for that mask, does this do anything? Yes. So this looks like it's rotating it. I'll rotate it to the 90 degrees, and then it should be going the correct grain around. So this wood fibers mixed with the pattern wood fibers, both fibers are facing in the right direction. The only issue is maybe the resolution isn't quite high enough, but that looks pretty good for the wood grain for the wheel. Now the last thing we have to do is the metals, the steel for the wheels and the kind of the ridges on the wheel and stuff. Okay, so then I'm gonna look for a kind of a steel material. I do like Smart Materials. They generally use a generator, which gives it some extra options that are fun. We've got all these steels down at the bottom: steel ruined, steel painted, steel rusted. Steel ruined looks like what I'm for. I want something crunchy. I don't want it to look new, and everything should be old on this model, so it should look pretty damn old. So steel ruined, that looks about right. That's what I'm going for. Real crunchy. Some nice things about this one. Okay, cool. So that'll work. I just have to right-click on it and say Add Mask with Color Selection. Pick the color, and then I'm going to pick green in this case. And as long as I don't have any major issues with my material ID map, that looks pretty good. So yeah, this is kind of the first part of what I want to get to. I want everybody to easily be able to get to here. It really shouldn't take you too long. The cannon itself needs some more work, so that's what I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes doing. But if everybody can at least get to this point, and then we're going to export out these, and I'll show you how to render in Maya, rendering with Arnold. Okay, so we got to here. Whenever I'm doing anything in art, I always get everything together, get it all in, then I sit back and I ask myself, does it look good? I think that's a very important thing all artists need to do, especially before your art director, your professor ever looks at your work. It's always a good idea to ask yourself, does it look good? Because there could be all kinds of ways that it is maybe not the best, and you know it. You're just like, well, I'm done. Well, you can't stop there. You always got to just look at it and say, am I happy with this? So, and the first thing I'm not happy with is that the cannon just needs a little more work to it. And then the other thing is I want a little more grime, a little more soot, definitely soot on the inside of the cannon. I don't like how this part got too mirrored. It's not terrible, but it does look a little funky how this shape is mirrored. It's pretty clearly obvious. I love the steel, though. The steel's working out really well. Okay, so I'm just gonna first off play with the cannon a little bit to try to get the feel to make a little more sense. I had this corroded stuff in there. It was not exactly giving me what I wanted. Generator's a little off, but maybe if I play with the generator. Yeah, it feels a little better. It's nice to have some corrosion in there. And then, like, all in all, it's like, it just feels really shiny. So maybe the bronze base, I bring down the roughness just a little bit. Or bring up the roughness just a little bit. That seems to it's still really bright. That's kind of the Substance Painter's natural reflections are really bright. But I do want to see those reflections. That's going to be very important in the final render, is that if you see the reflections or not, if you see the shine or not, it's going to determine whether or not it feels like metal. And that's reflection is how you see metal. I talked a little bit about what metallic was. When you turn it on and off, it's either metal or plastic. If you notice, when it goes really streaky, it's shiny, it's reflective. That reflection is reflecting the world around it. Substance Painter has a sky dome that it's reflecting onto this. But if we brought this into Maya, and Maya is in a black world, it doesn't matter how bright our direct light is on it, it will end up being black because it's reflecting black. You take a chrome ball and you put it in a black room, it will reflect black, and that's why you need something for your metals to reflect if you want them to feel like metals. It was a little better. I think the other thing is the base color just could be a little darker. A little, not necessarily richer, but just darker would give it a little more contrast, and that's what I'm looking for. That feels a little better, and then let's see, look at the corrosion one more time, see if I can maybe play with the generator so that it just has a little better feel to it. Where'd it go?
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't Substance Painter have background rendering for the viewport, so you could have the background reflect off the metal surface?
Well, yeah, Substance Painter has a default image already set up. I don't know what it is exactly, but that reflection there, that's from an image. That's an HDR image that Substance
Oh, really?
Painter, yeah, it's already baked in to Substance Painter. There's an HDR image in the scene, even though you can't see it.
Oh, okay, so you don't necessarily have to configure it yourself.
No, yeah, exactly. It's already there.
Right.
Maya, you do have to figure, and that's why, yeah, Christopher, it's just called Panorama. But Maya doesn't have one, and that's why I'm bringing it up, is because when we get to Maya, I'm going to have to show you how to put it in there. I think there's a place in which you can adjust the background. You can add a background into it. I think it's under settings or something.
I think it's under the texture sets area. Usually I just have it set to panorama, but it's in one of those.
It's one of those, I think it might be display settings or something. It's one of those on the side, on the right-hand side, the collapse shelf buttons.
Oh, display settings, yeah.
I know I just know I mash it until I find the right one.
Oh, there it is.
Because here you can find the different environments. You can also turn on your environment map. By the way, just to be clear, in this class, I don't really like seeing blurry environment maps behind your objects. If you could always just keep the opacity off, it's going to help with presentation. It just looks better. This, to me, looks like there's something blurry, and it just looks like an artifact that's wrong. So keeping the environment opacity down, I prefer. But then here you can find any HDR image that you want in the environment map. And it will change the lighting slightly. Say if it's a space scene, it's probably a good idea to use a space type material if it's dark or something. But most of these are going to be pretty bright, and they do a pretty good job. It's nice to see all the different different material color, affecting. The HDR affects the color quite a bit. And so that could change how Maya sees it versus how Substance sees it, because the lighting color has changed a little bit. But let's go back to Panorama. This one has a blue sky. It is a real world one, but the color isn't too intense. But yeah, display settings, that'll give you your all kinds of options. Let's see, there's some shader settings. Most of these we don't really use. But display settings you might want to use if you want to change your environment map. But I will show you in Maya how to add an environment map as well. Before we move to Maya. I know I did want to do a grind pass, but oops, I lost. I did want to do a grind pass. That'll take a little while, but more importantly, I want to make sure that everybody's aware how to paint over seams. And although I've kind of hidden most of the seams in this, let's see if there's any place. It's because of the triplanar projection. You don't really see too many seams. That's great, but every now and then you're going to end up with some sort of artifact, and you want to paint it out. This case, I don't know what's going on with this spot right here. It looks like I might have messed up on those. I want to show you how you can just directly paint over it with a rubber stamp tool, and it will affect it exactly how you want it. So this is I'm going to talk about this at the end of the semester when we're doing final things, and I'm going to talk about it right now. It's one of the most useful things to know in Substance Painter is how to paint over seams. Because your textures all get on there, that's great, but if you got a big seam and you're not sure how to paint on it, it can be very, very frustrating. So there's just some little minor issues that I want to get rid of, and I want to paint that out by hand. So what I'm going to do is create a new layer, which I just did. I'll do it again. Create a new layer. I'm going to right-click and add a add a paint. This is a paint layer. And then I'm going to make sure that it is set to pass through on the paint and the layer. Both need to be set to pass through. That's the little thing on the right. It usually says Norm, like, hey, Norm! From Cheers, if anybody ever watched Cheers. Norm was the guy at the bar. He always came in. And
everybody knows your name.
Yeah, everybody knows your name. So it usually says Norm. We want it to say pass through, but we don't just want it to say pass through for the base color. We want it to say pass through for the height. We want it to say pass through for the roughness. We want it to say pass through for the metallic and also pass through for the normal. And then once everything's set to pass through, go back to base color, and you can use this rubber stamp tool. You can you click on the rubber stamp tool, and then you're gonna hold down V, and then that'll grab this area, and you can paint from this area to wherever you want. This will help me get rid of some of these minor issues. Some of them look like it's not letting me. Yeah, some of them look like they're a little more problematic. For probably a UV issue. But anywhere where I'm not happy with something that's going on, yeah, that looks like I think the UVs might have been a little too thin in that spot. That's too bad. And then sometimes painting out the normal will fix this. But let's see, base color, height, normal. All these things are set to pass through, so it should work. But if I'm on the paint layer, you will at least be able to grab. Apparently, there's some artifacts that I might need to paint out by hand, or refix that that UV. But other than that, this will usually fix all of my issues that I'm having problems with. But yeah, what you can do is, like, if you really like a textural spot, you can repeat it. This helps fix seams, and then also if you want something to go away, you can use that to hide things. So the rubber stamp tool, this little thing over here, will be very, very useful. I know it's not necessarily that useful on my Canon because I've gotten most of the seams already taken care of, but it is very good and come in very handy for all kinds of things. Okay, so let's say I'm got all my seams taken care of. I probably would have to refix that UV. That seems like what it is. The issue is that there's just minor UV, causing some blackness in certain areas. But other than that, everything's great. And then I want to add like maybe a grime layer over everything. And maybe we can just grab one of these really crunchy steels, see what it gives us. This is cool because it's still shiny. It's not going to get rid of my shine completely, as soot doesn't necessarily get rid of the shine completely. So maybe that's what I want to do, is add a grime layer that is essentially still shiny and still has some nice effect to it, but I'm going to mask it out with to create the grime on this. So this I'm going to use just on the bronze. So we're still going to do add mask with color selection. We'll pick the bronze. It's going to go over everything, and then I'll, well, I don't even need the add mask with color selection. What I'll do is I'll add a black mask, and then I'll use my brush to paint a little bit of grime in areas that it doesn't. Well, I'll grab my brush. We'll go to properties and make sure that my brush is using a white. You can see it on the sphere there that it's white, and then if it's white, it's going to make that steel show up whenever I paint. So that's what I want, just to get some soot in these areas, and maybe it's a little too shiny. I can affect that. Yeah, let's here. Let me delete that mask and just. It's a little too shiny, so I want it to go down and shine just a little bit. So we've got metal here. We can look at the finish rough, or let's just see if the metal. Looks like this one's grabbing some other material. And yeah, this one looks like it's actually giving it a very specific material, which can cause some issues because of I don't have quite as much control over it. But if I play around with these sets, maybe I can get something like this that at least is vibe. Down the uniform color. So maybe that's not the best use for grime because it's a little too shiny. So let's try to find this another steel that has a little darker grunge to it. Okay, so this one still has some grunge. What I can do is I can just turn off the underlying base, and it should show the steel underneath it. And yeah, that's what I want. And this will create a real nice grunge to the whole thing. So we got that's working. Okay, so now I'm just going to create a black mask, and then using a white brush, I can go in and add some soot. And that's what this cannon was really missing, was the soot, and kind of the darkness. Otherwise, it felt just a little too much like a toy or something that didn't exist in real life. And I just love to grab, a fun brush, something with some texture on it, give it a little bit of extra soot. And I can hit X, it'll swap the color from black to white, and that is very helpful if I want to get rid of some areas and add some areas. I just wanted a little bit of darkness in the cannon itself, and then for the wood, I might end up eventually putting some grime on it. Usually I wouldn't use the metallic for the wood, but because the wood wasn't, or the metallic wasn't very shiny, I think this will work fine. Yeah, just a little bit of grime here and there. Grime tends to streak down because it's mostly about rain. Most grime is rain, except in the Canon you will have smoke grime with soot that ends up being a lot in the front, and then perhaps if people are wiping this area off, you do have areas that are clean. And usually the whole front piece of the Canon is pretty clean, so even where that grunge is that I should have had the initial grunge of the Canon bronze, I think I want to remove it from that one area. So go back to my bronze statue. I look for my corrosion. And then this, I already had a mask on it, so I can use that mask to get rid of some of this area in the front, where I do want this whole front area to be a little shinier, a little less corroded than some of the other parts. Especially the parts that end up being the most corroded are usually the ones that are going to be in a crack. If it's next to the wood, the moisture from the wood would probably seep up and really corrode the Canon. Sometimes the top of it is going to be more corroded because it gets hit with rain more, but other times people would be like me. If I ever go to a park and I see a Canon, it's pretty likely that I'm going to hop up on there and pretend like I'm riding it. And in that case, this area would be very, very smoothed out or less corroded because people would keep on getting up there and kind of wiping that area with their fabric of their clothes. And then that area becomes very shiny. This is that's kind of what I'm going for. You know, I want a little character. I want a little grime. I don't want it to be too noisy. I want it to feel somewhat kind of deliberate. I don't want it. The only thing that might be a little too noisy now is the steel, and I'm just going to spend just a couple minutes on the steel, and I think we'll be done. So turn off all my bronzes and look for my steel ruined, and then I want to open that up, look for the major corrosion of the steel. I guess it's a bunch of layers here. That's okay. So I like that. The edge highlighting, that's really good. So I'm going to keep that. I'm just going to get rid of some of these, which is a little too crunchy altogether. And then what I want is some areas where it is actually shiny. Otherwise, if it's all dirty and all grimy, you can't see any of the material kind of shining through. So I can do it this way because it is CG and we can kind of mess with reality. I could put shiny steel over the corroded steel, and that might be a good idea because I can't get what I'm looking for is a real nice shine on certain spots. So what if I used steel, just one more steel that is a little cleaner and less corroded, and then I will add a mask with color correction and pick the color, and then what I'm going to do is group this whole thing. Control G of whatever layer it is will group it to a new layer, and then I can add a black mask, and then now with a white brush I will just kind of go in and add over any area that I want a little less corrosion, because it is nice to have some shiny spots in your model. It's very, very important. Let's turn my opacity up. Everything should be up. Flow is a little too low. Yeah, I'm just kind of playing around. You want some character certain places, and you want some shine of a material other places. And that back and forth is the believability. If everything's too crunchy, people generally don't believe it. It just feels noisy as hell. Final thing, the major issue would be this seam here. I'm just going to play around with the wood on the chassis to see if I can just adjust it just a hair so it's not quite so obvious. I think that seam, I'm going to have to live with it a little bit because it is mirrored in the center. but I bet I could change my wood fibers to be slightly different. Some kind of pattern here. Yeah, so I could even just mask out the pattern right there because it looks fine if you take the pattern off. So I grouped the pattern, I'm going to add a white mask, and then I'm going to paint black in that one spot, and that will get rid of that area. So any area that's some sort of knot or something that you don't want there, you can just create a white mask and then put black in that area, and it'll get rid of any knot that you don't want. Okay, so yeah, this is what I'm looking for as far as the material, something that has some reality to it, but I definitely want shine. I don't want us to get too grungy. I want us to see some shine in the material, and then we're ready to go. So I'm just going to save this, and we're going to export. One thing that I did leave out that could be of value to a lot of people is if you wanted to bring in a new, like a texture or like even an emblem or something. And I think it'd be worth it to give 2 minutes to that. So I'm just going to create a new layer, and then I'm going to find some sort of emblem, like a fleur-de-lis or something on just like a black and white mask, and use that. So something along these lines. Let's see. That was Premiere. Okay, so I'm just going to save it off as a JPEG onto my desktop, and now we can import a new texture. If you go to your texture panel in Shelves, and then you drag your new whatever texture you've made, you drag it over to this window. So desktop, I save it. There it is. Okay, you drag it to this window. It's going to give you the option to import it. Just make sure that it's imported in your texture slots. And then also you want to import your resource into the current session. You do that, it should show up here, and then you can apply it in a number of different ways. You can add it as a fill and move it around. And that would be, let's say, we turn off everything other than color and add this fill to my base color. And it adds it over everything. That's not what we want, but maybe we can scale it down, and then instead of repeat, we can have it not repeat at all. And then this way, you can actually move it around wherever you want. But I think there are some better ways to do this. I believe there's like a stenciling way of doing this. I don't know if anybody has used it as a stencil. I think there's a way that with a brush, you can create a brush that is that uses it as a stencil. So let's see, let's go to brushes. I'm just going to get a basic brush, and then I can do down here. I think you can give it an alpha. Go back to my textures. Pull the, no, it doesn't give me, okay, let's do it that way. Stencil, there it is. So I can pull it over to the stencil, and then what this does is, if I wanted to, it just blanks it over everything. So if I wanted to use this as a stencil, this black and white map, I'll zoom up on an area, and then, let's see, let's add a paint to this. Zoom in on an area, and it should basically project this stencil through exactly, like it was a mask on a, you were painting it with a silk screen or something, and that's pretty cool. But of course, it just kind of puts it directly on, in this case, the default color, and you you can mess around so it also becomes a height map instead of a color. There's all kinds of fun things you can do with stencils. But anyway, we'll move on. This isn't necessarily important for the assignment. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of all the fun stuff that we can do here. And then now, for the final part of today's lesson that is going to be really important is getting this into Maya and having it render so that the materials act exactly the same as they do with Substance Painter. So step number one is we have to export the textures. And it's pretty simple these days. We don't have to do anything weird. Used to be you had to do some like math. Oh, come on, don't die on me now. Okay, here we are. So it's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to export into the folder that we want to keep our textures in. Let's see. Canon. Okay, and I'm just going to select the folder. We're going to use PBR Medical Roughness as our output template. We're going to make sure that it's based off of the texture size that we already had. The dilation infinite is good. All of this stuff should be ready to go, and we just hit export. Okay, cool. I'm just going to open up a Google Doc because there's some stuff that I want to make sure everybody remembers here. And it's, okay, so this is Substance Painter to Maya, and it's the Arnold renderer in Maya. This is going to be vitally important that we follow these steps exactly. At first, we just export out. That's our first step. And then I'm going to open up Maya. I'm going to find my low res. And we will take a look at it and see it with the textures on there. Okay, so let me just duplicate this. It looks like I lost my axle, but oh well. Here. Okay, so this is our model. Step number one is we apply a AI standard surface shader. So go to right-click on your model, say Assign New Material, and click on your Arnold tab, and you're going to find AI Standard Surface. So step number one. The next step is going to, you want to name it, and then we're going to begin by adding the base color. Now this is vitally important that you realize the difference between there's color and then there's specular. In color, we don't ever touch diffuse roughness. I want to be clear, this one, leave it at 0, never do anything with it, just leave it the way it is. Metalness we will affect, but this one, often people are confused. They think they need to put the roughness map into diffuse roughness. We never do that. We always leave it at 0. So the first thing that we do is we apply our color map, and the only thing we might need to do is turn up the weight to 1 instead of 0.8. But you apply the color map, you go and you find your file. Bless you, kitty. I think the cat's allergic to something. Okay, and now I'm going to look for my base color. So Canon Low Initial Shading Group base color, that's the one that I'm working with. We'll hit that, and we should be able to see the base color come in. There's no shine, anything cool like that, but we do have color, which is a good place to start. Okay, so we've got color. Now, what's next? The next thing would be to apply metalness. So I just want to say the first step, apply the shader. The second step, apply color map. The third step is apply metallic map. And this is where things get complicated because in metalness, it has to be a black and white alpha. We don't actually use alphas. We're just going to click alpha, set alpha as luminance, and that's going to fix it for us. So we go File. We find our file. It's going to be metallic. And then we make sure two things. We make sure that color space is set to raw and that color balance is alpha is luminance is clicked on. So those two things are really important. So apply the metallic map, set color space to raw, and set color balance or check and that is vitally important for metallic. It's also exactly what we're going to do for roughness. Because they're similar maps, they will work exactly the same way. So apply the roughness map and set color space to raw and check alpha is luminance. So we did that to metallic. You can see that it got a little darker when we did that. Now if we go into my material, you've got your specular values, and this is where we do the specular roughness. Again, not diffuse roughness. We do specular roughness, and down here it says roughness. That's where we plug in our specular map. We click here, the little checkerboard. We go to File. We find our file. It's going to be roughness. We set color space to raw, and then we click alpha is luminance. Just like the metallic map, those things are done exactly the same way. And then the final step in applying the material is we go down to geometry and we click bump map. And bump map, we're going to do a normal map. We're going to first just click on a file. It automatically builds this bump 2D node. And then we make sure that this bump 2D node is set from bump to tangent space normals. Step number 1 there. So apply normal. It's under geometry. And then set bump node to tangent space normals. And then where it says bump value, you apply your file. And it should already have a file applied. You just need to find the image name. And that's under normal. Click that. And then the final thing, very, very important to do, is to check your color space to make sure that it's set to raw. Every time you re-import a map, it's going to set it to sRGB. What it's doing is it thinks it's a diffuse, it thinks it's a color map. Color maps do need an sRGB setting, but all black and white maps and normal maps do not, because it compresses information that you end up losing. So need to set that to raw. So we apply the normal map, we set the bump node to tangent space normals, apply a file to bump value, set color space to raw, and then the final step of this whole process is to check your normal map. So everything that I did, it should all be working and set correctly. Now, before I look at my materials, make sure my materials are working, I want to check my normal map. I'm going to do that by using a direct light. This direct light is very, very one-directional. It's I just want to make sure it's pointing in a very specific direction. And then what I'll do is I will render it in the Arnold renderer. Make sure Arnold render is turned on. I'll hit render. That's just the render view. I'll hit render. And what I'm looking for at this stage is to see if the bolts look like they are being hit by a light that's above them. If they are broken, they're going to look like they're hit by a light below them. And in this case, you can see
my bolts look like they're being hit by a light below them. That light looks like it's coming from below. It's clearly coming from above. What that tells me is that the normal direction is wrong. So the first thing that you do after you put your material together is test your normal map directions. And so what that tells me is that something is wrong. And usually what that means is that the green channel needs to be flipped. If we open up a normal map in Maya, or sorry, in Photoshop, the way that these normals work is they use the 3 channels. Actually, they really just only use 2 channels. But they use these 2 channels, the red and the green, to tell if things are facing, which direction things are supposed to be facing in our world. So when we look at these bolts, it's the green channel that goes left and right, and it's the red channel that goes up and down, which is kind of how everything is laid out. And so one of these need to be flipped. And you can either flip it in Photoshop just by inverting it, but there is another quicker way to do that. What I'm going to do is turn on my Arnold viewport renderer. Nope. Like, it's not working. Okay. So for some reason, my Arnold viewport renderer isn't working. So what I'm going to do is just use the render view. I'm going to save this render. You do that by hitting this button. It keeps the image. And then I'm going to not change the lighting. I want the lighting pretty much the way it was. So I'm only seeing a difference in normal map. And then I'm going to go to my material, just right-click, go down, material attributes. I'll go to my bump map, find my file node that shows up right away. I actually want to look for my bump node. And so if we were to look at this in Hypershade, you graph your material, you're going to see there's the main material, and then you've got a bump node, and then you've got a file node. And so the bump node, where the bump values are and everything, I want to select that, and it doesn't show up in the Hypershade. This is really frustrating, but it does show up in the attribute editor, so you have to kind of do this with both windows open. But what you do is you select your bump node, and then you go to your attribute editor, go to the Arnold tab, and then we will click down the Arnold tag where it says the red channel, flip the red channel. I'm going to unclick that, and then let's re-render and see what the direction the light's facing now. Okay, so it looks like it's facing up, but there also seems to be some other issue. I think if I rotated the light this direction, where it's kind of horizontal, let's see if it looks like it's being hit in that direction. So I'm going to save this render. We'll render this again. Okay, so it just looks like it should be, it doesn't look totally off, but something does look wrong to me there. It doesn't look totally off, but something does feel wrong. So I'm going to grab my material. I'm going to go to my bump node. What it does is it spits me into my file node. If I click on these little guys up here, this will go back and forth between other connections. So it goes right up back to my bump node. And then I'm going to unclick, flip green channel, and see if it looks better if I do that. And it looks worse, so it's facing the other way. So apparently the green channel should be flipped, but the red channel should be not. That's usually what I find when it comes to the normal maps. I always test it, no matter what software I'm in. I just never trust my normal maps. You never want to throw your model into a world and have it look like crap. You always want it to look good, so I always test my normals. Normals, if they're broken, it will look bad. You're not really sure exactly what's wrong, but it will look bad, and it's always good to double check your normals, make sure they're facing the right way. Now that it's facing the right way, I have one major issue. There's no reflection in my metals. So I'm going to first create kind of a little platform so that I can present this cannon. I just want something that is high enough fidelity that doesn't look like I'm just got some sort of low polygon thing in here. So maybe this has a whole bunch of divisions as far as a cylinder. And then there's definitely something I want to do where I bevel this edge so that it's not so incredibly chiseled and everything. I just giving it a number of bevels. Softer, and I can mesh display off an edge. And maybe just add a on there. This is fine. I could absolutely use some sort of material on there, but at this stage, I'd rather just put a flat Arnold surface with a low roughness value. So Arnold surface, or sorry, a high roughness value, so it's very rough. Bring my actual color down to some sort of gray. So this will give me a platform to present my cannon on. I'm going to want to rotate my cannon into kind of a more natural space and put it together, put it where it's supposed to be. And then if I render now, it's still going to be very, very dark. Even though I have a light in here, it's still going to be very dark because there's not a lot for the metal to reflect. But as I can tell, I am getting metal reflections. So the metallic is working correctly, happy about that. Now what I need to do is add some sort of to reflect. And most of the time, our scenes will have a sky dome, something like that. In this case, I'm just going to go into the Arnold renderer, go to environment, add a sky shader. So put a sky shader around everything. I can give it whatever file I need. Most people will have some sort of picture of an outside world. You could even take Substance Painter's HDR maps, use those. There's all kinds of things you can use. I'm just going to see if I can just grab some sort of random texture. It really doesn't need to be anything specific. I just need something that has contrast in it. So this one, it's too gray. Yeah, something like this will work. And then here's what I don't want. I don't want this big blurry image behind my model. So what I'm going to do is I'll right-click on my sky dome, or just Control A on your sky dome to go to the attributes of your sky dome. Click down on Render Stats. You've got primary visibility. I'm going to turn that off. And now when I render, it will have the HDR image in the background. Well, it's not HDR, but at least it's a reflecting image. And then it will project that reflection, that light onto the cannon. We will get that contrast and that reflection, and you can see the cannon is actually reflecting something. It's not just going black. Sometimes it looks good if it's dark, if it's a dark reflection, because you get the streaks, as long as you have some sort of shine. So I do this, then the one thing that you'll hear me talk a lot about with lighting is three-point lighting. And the point of three-point lighting is you have one main light, then you have a rim light, and that rim light's usually going to be a little brighter, and then you have some sort of ambient light. Often the bounce light is good enough for ambient light, but I'm just going to add a little blue, kind of dark ambient light here. So three-point lighting, the number one thing that's important with three-point lighting for me is the rim light, because the rim light really sets it off the background and gives it a nice professional vibe. I think that's something that a lot of student work suffers from, is that they just don't put a rim light in. Maybe they don't think they need to, maybe they think they've seen too many rim lights, maybe they've forgotten about a rim light. But the reason why rim lights are important is they separate the object from the environment. And if you have ever seen a movie, if you've ever seen a video game, if you've ever seen a professional photograph, there is always a rim light. That is like almost necessity when it comes to a professional work, whether it's photography, film, video games, modeling, anything. Presentation with a rim light is always going to look a little better. I'm using directional lights, but if you are using other lights, you can use a spot or an area light. Those work really well. Just make sure that you turn your exposure up in the Arnold tab. Otherwise, those lights are really, really dim. They also don't project very far if the exposure isn't up. So when it comes to the directional lights, they're great straight out of the box. The area lights and the spotlights, you're going to have to turn your exposure up. And this works out pretty great. The only thing I don't like about the directional lights is the shadows are very, very crisp. And that would be one reason to use an area light. The other thing that sucks with directional lights is if you have a ceiling above you, a roof, or anything like that, it will, directional lights kind of cast light from outer space, and in that case, it will think of your roof as a real object, and it will cast a shadow onto your object. So your directional lights won't work if you have a roof over your object. But here we've got 3-point lighting. This is absolutely what I'm looking for next week. I just need the metals to look like metals, the wood to look like wood, and the Canon, the normal maps all to work. I need the normal maps to be facing the right direction, and just one clean shot. I don't really care about a background or anything. I just want one clean shot that shows me that you got all the way through this project. I'll save this, and then before we end class, I'm just going to add an area light because they are fun, and I just want people to understand how non-directional lights work in Maya. So this area light, it's this big flat area. We'll make it bigger. I'll angle it down. If you notice, if I render now, it's probably going to be pretty dim. Not getting a hell of a lot of a rim light there. We barely even see the shadow. So yeah, the area light is really, really dim. So what we do is we go into the Arnold tab and we turn up the exposure to at least 1. We turn the intensity up a little bit. Rim lights tend to be very, very bright. You want to see that kind of bright ridging on your rim light. That's going to be very, very important for bouncing your object off of the background. So still not really showing up. Let's turn up our exposure even more. Let's go to 5. Let's do an IPR. Yeah, 5 looks like it's starting to actually hit it. And then if we turn our intensity up a little bit more, probably hit it even more. This looks really good. What I love is that nice white line around the edges. And then the great thing about the area light is that the shadows are a lot softer. So I'm going to rotate it a little bit because I want the rim light mostly to hit the front of the Canon, not just the back. Let's move this centers the whole thing. Let's take a look. Cool. Nice soft rim light, not too crunchy, but it's definitely there. It's separating the object from the background. The wood looks like wood. The steel is reflecting color and light, and this is all good. So this is what I'm looking for next week. Obviously, there's going to be all kinds of variations on the quality, but if we can get to here, I'll be happy, and I'll know everybody has done the Canon assignment, and then we can move on to the final project, which is what we'll be talking about the entirety of next class. So that is all for today. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't think I have any questions at the moment, but I'll probably have questions as I go along.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's always something that comes up. Definitely just feel free to hit me up on Teams. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. But yeah, go through it. This is all recorded. I'll stop the recording now, and then I'll try to upload it as soon as I can.